80s was the golden age for horror. That decade had every single thing that makes horror movies great. Gore, practical effects, and some of the most inventive horror stories ever put to screen. But in the sea of horror movies that were released in the 1980s, we were bound to miss so many underrated gems. Yes, some of these on this list have gone on to get a cult following, but they don't get the love that they truly deserve. So today, we're going to take a look at 5 of some of my most underrated horror movies from the 1980s. Let's get into it. Dressed to Kill. Kicking things off with a controversial one now, guys. Directed by Brian De Palma, Dressed to Kill sits right on the edge between slasher horror and psychological thriller, and that's exactly what makes it such a fantastic and fascinating movie. The film follows a series of brutal murders connected to a mysterious blonde woman and a razor-wielding killer. But what really sets the movie apart isn't just the violence, it's the atmosphere. Directed by Brian De Palma, who has given us some of the greatest movies of all time, he leans heavily into his visual storytelling with this movie. Early in the movie, there's actually a fantastic museum sequence, which plays out almost entirely without dialogue, which it builds up the tension through music, the editing, and pure cinematic language. It's slow, hypnotic, and incredibly effective. And it's nearly 10 minutes long as well, which shows just how much of a master Brian De Palma is. But let's get real with this movie now. The movie was very controversial when it came out, just because of its themes around sexuality and identity, which sparked a lot of backlash. But looking back now though, it feels like a bold and stylized experiment that pushed horror into more of the psychological territory, where we're seeing a lot of that now coming out. But with this movie though, the kills. Absolutely amazing and still shocking. They still feel uncomfortable, but they are very memorable. If you're into horror that feels slick, artistic, and just a little bit dangerous, Dressed to Kill is absolutely worth revisiting for you. Basket Case. Now we're moving into pure cult horror territory, guys. Directed by Frank Henenlotter, Basket Case is one of the weirdest and probably one of the most unforgettable horror movies to ever be made and that you will ever see. The story follows Dwayne, a quiet young man who arrives in New York City carrying a mysterious wicker basket everywhere he goes. Inside this basket, his deformed, violent twin brother, Belial. Yeah, it gets strange very, very quickly with this movie, and it's absolutely amazing. But underneath all the gore and insanity, Basket Case is actually a surprisingly emotional story about isolation, dependency, and revenge, all for Belial. The relationship between Dwayne and Belial, though, is disturbing, it's tragic, and, at times, it's weirdly sympathetic. But what really makes the film stand out, though, is its grimy, low-budget New York atmosphere. Now remember, this was in 1982 when this movie came out, and back then, New York wasn't the city it is now. Yes, it was still, the city that never sleeps and all this, but back then, it was dirty, there was crime everywhere, and people were scared to go there. All you need to do is look at the film Maniac, which it just shows you how visually spectacular New York looked, but it was also just dirty, chaotic, and every single place you went, it was very unpredictable. But with that there, that gives this movie the raw underground energy that fits perfectly with its very bizarre premise. And let's be honest though, the practical effects are what gives this movie its charm. Belial's design is grotesque, but also strangely iconic. The stop motion scenes and creature effects may look rough today, but the handmade quality gives you the movie a personality that you just can't replicate with CGI. This is the kind of film that could only exist in the early 80s. Sleazy, uncomfortable, very funny, very horrifying, and completely unique. At the time as well, it was considered very strange for mainstream audiences to get behind it, but over the years though, it has actually become one of the biggest and genuine cult classics. You could possibly put this in the table of cult classics to go along with like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, that is that kind of cult classic. But if you're tired of generic slashers though and want something truly different, Basket Case is absolutely essential viewing for you. Pumpkinhead. Now, this one leans fully into the dark and gothic horror. Directed by legendary effects artist Stan Winston in his directing debut, I may add, Pumpkinhead tells a simple story, but a powerful one. Grief, revenge, and the consequences that come with all of that. After a tragic accident that takes his son, a father turns to a backwoods witch to summon a demon known as Pumpkinhead, a creature that enacts vengeance on those responsible. Straight away, I'm all in. And with this, the killings begin. He realizes, though, the cost of revenge might be far greater than he imagined. But with this movie, directed by Stan Winston, let's talk about the creature design for a second, because Pumpkinhead is absolutely incredible. It's tall, skeletal, almost demonic in appearance, and brought to life with practical effects that still holds up in this year, in 2026. But again, no, we are talking about Stan Winston. Stan Winston, to me, along with Rick Baker, these two, and Dick Smith, these are the greatest horror makeup guys ever. So everything they did, not just some of the stuff, it was spectacular. Everything was. And when you have the person who is one of those directing his first movie as well, you know it's gonna look chef's kiss. It really is. But beyond all the monsters, and what really sticks with you though, is the tone. The movie feels heavy, it's very bleak, it's emotional, and almost like a twisted fairy tale, which when you see Pumpkinhead, it really is. There's a moral weight to everything that happens as well, which gives it more depth than just a typical creature feature. But if you want a horror movie with atmosphere, emotion, and one of the coolest monster designs ever, Pumpkinhead is a must-watch. Opera. Now, if style is your thing, this one is going to hit hard, and if you haven't seen it, you need to go and watch it right now. Directed by Dario Argento, Opera is a masterclass in visual horror, blending brutal violence with almost dreamlike cinematography. The story follows a young opera singer who becomes the target of a masked killer. But instead of just killing her, he forces her to watch his murders by taping needles beneath her eyes so she physically can't look away. It's disturbing, and it's also absolutely amazingly cool. It really is. Dario Argento in the 80s, he had a list of movies that came out. All were just great. But for some unknown reason, for me, I think Opera is one of his greatest movies he's ever made, along with Inferno. It's just so stylized. And as we were talking earlier about Brian De Palma with Dressed to Kill, this movie, it's absolutely just, you can't take your eyes off the screen, which is kind of crazy to think of, because if you can't take your eyes off the screen while the actual victim in the movie has to watch everything, and if she blinks, she's gonna tear her eyelids. Amazing, it really is. But what really makes Opera stand out is how it's shot. As we were saying, Argento, he's just one of the best visual directors ever. And in this movie, he uses sweeping camera movements, intense close-ups, and even POV shots that put you right in the middle of the horror. And there are moments that feel almost surreal. You know, close-ups of the eyes, just. But then there's the soundtrack as well. It mixes classical opera with unexpected bursts of heavy metal, which somehow it works perfectly. And if you've ever seen Metallica S&M with the San Francisco Opera, you know what I'm talking about. But it didn't get the same level of recognition as Argento's earlier films like Suspiria. But honestly, Opera deserves to be in that conversation. It's stylish, brutal, and completely unforgettable. Intruder. Now finally, we have one of the most underrated slasher movies ever made. Set almost entirely inside a grocery store after closing time, Intruder takes a simple concept and turns it into a tense, brutal, and surprisingly very creative horror movie. So, we're in a group of supermarket employees, they're working the night shift, when someone begins stalking and killing them, one by one. It's very straightforward, And honestly, it is. But the execution is what makes this film stand out. Directed by Scott Spiegel, who also co-wrote Evil Dead 2, the movie has that same chaotic camera energy and dark sense of humor running through it. You can feel the influence immediately. The camera work here is incredibly inventive for a low-budget slasher. There are shots moving through telephones, across shopping carts, inside shelves, basically turning the supermarket itself into part of the horror. And with Evil Dead 2, with the way the camera is going around, when it is the evil, think of that, but inside a closed supermarket. It's amazing. Now for me, the kills, absolutely savage and some of the most inventive ever. The movie does not hold back when it comes to the practical gore effects. Meat slicers, compactors, hooks. It's like if it exists in a grocery store, the film finds a horrifying way to use it. That's possibly the best way to describe it. But what's also cool about this movie though, is how the amount of horror royalty is just connected to the movie. You've got cameos from Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell, obviously considering the close connection with Evil Dead 2 and, well, Scott Spiegel of the director of this movie. But there's so much more going into this, because there's so much comedy as well. But for Intruder, it flew under the radar for quite the many years. Maybe it came out too late in the slasher boom, it did come out in the late 80s, or maybe it was just overshadowed by bigger franchises at the time. Obviously, we did have A Nightmare on Elm Street, where Freddy Krueger is classed as the granddaddy of all slasher granddaddies. But either way though, horror fans eventually rediscovered it, and to be honest with you, it's earned its cult reputation as one of the most hidden gems of the 1980s. If you love practical effects, creative kills, and classic slasher atmosphere, Intruder is absolutely worth checking out. So there you have it guys, 5 underrated horror movies from the 1980s that I think deserve way more love. You may have seen some of these, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and if you've got your own hidden gems from that decade, drop me a line and let me know. So until next time guys, subscribe, stick around for more horror deep dives on the channel, and I think you'll actually enjoy this playlist right by here.